Thank you. You know what? The pleasure is actually all mine because you're on here to speak about something that I think I've talked about for the last 2000 years.
Give or take.
Give or take, I've been reincarnated a few times, the dream and the mission doesn't stop,
Yep.
and it's something that I honestly think a lot of people don't talk about it, and it's the impact of femininity when it comes to women,
Yeah.
how it's perceived. I think in a lot of cases is weaponized against women, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I don't think everyone's here to hear me speak. They're probably here to hear you speak. So before we jump right into this, I want to get your definition. What is femininity in a woman, and how do you think it should be perceived?
Sure. Well, even that question sounds simple, but it's a big question, Terrain. So let me see what I can, I'll do my best to kind of keep it simple, break it down. Femininity and its counterpart masculinity both are energies within our psyche. So they exist within all of us. We all have both femininity and masculinity. Now, each of us as individuals will tend to lean more toward one polarity than the other. Not that we can't navigate both, of course we can, but we will generally feel more comfortable being in one polarity more of the time. And each of these qualities, each of these energies has its own unique qualities, and they work together, especially when we can bring forward these energies in their best ways possible. So, some of the highlights and key qualities of femininity, our greatest strengths are absolutely in our intuition and our emotional depth, but we also have access to pleasure, joy, creativity, flow, communication, communion, connection, empathy. And the energy of femininity is receptive. It wants to take in and even draw in energy. So that's juxtaposed, of course, with healthy masculine energy, which has leadership, guidance, nurturing, direction, some effort, generosity at its core. And the masculine is a giving energy. So within us, we again have both of these inside of us, but we will tend towards one or the other. And it's not always the case like we live in 2025, where there are so many different forms of gender expression, human expression, sexuality, all of that. But in a general way, and often, people born in a female body will tend toward the feminine polarity. So, my work and what I do is talk primarily to women who identify as feminine and who are interested in really destroying and dismantling the cultural narratives that prevent us from being in that feminine in a comfortable way, but also in a powerful way.
I like that because you highlighted on a number of behaviors that the person who identifies as a woman can be, right? Like you mentioned
Yeah.
community, you mentioned communication. You
Yeah.
also mentioned it's a giving energy. And I've always thought that to be the case, right? Because as someone that is a man and I'm more in my masculine energy than I'm in my feminine energy,
Yeah.
I'm the type of person that wants to like give,
Yes.
provide, right? Like you hear these type of
Yes.
words, right?
Yeah.
But
And it's a
why do you
beautiful energy.
Absolutely. But why do you think some people maybe confuse the two, or maybe not confuse? Maybe there's a lack of understanding
Yeah.
on what they can um, provide in those energies.
Absolutely. And there is a lot of confusion. And the first thing I definitely want to respond to before addressing this question is it's nobody's fault. Like, this is not a blame game. I kind of chalk it up to a couple of things. Number one, we've all grown up in this culture at this time, and I'm just going to name it. The culture is patriarchal. It just is. It has been for millennia. And there's debate as to whether we can call it the patriarchy for the past 3,000 years or even as far back as 8,000 years. So this culture, this patriarchal culture, has a long time to entrain us in its thought forms, which actually distort both masculinity and femininity. It's not helpful or handy for either energy in its most powerful way. But because it is a patriarchy, it does center masculine values, again, in a distorted way, not even necessarily a healthy way. And we've all just been indoctrinated into it. And so, There have been some harmful narratives that have contributed even to women themselves trying to repress, suppress, or even deny the feminine parts of themselves because we're taught that women are less valuable, women are weak, women are, to be seen and not heard. Women are only pretty when they smile, that women are illogical, and boy, is that terrible. Women are too emotional. And so women themselves actually go, oh my gosh, well, I better not be those things because they're not seen as valuable. And if I display these natural qualities of who I am, it's going to be, people are going to turn me away. I'm going to be seen as difficult, as too much. I'm going to be labeled high maintenance. I'm going to be called a bitch. I'm going to be called crazy. And so we actually do a lot of kind of curation and careful management of our own personalities and internal traits to try and be accepted by the culture in the way that it says we need to be accepted.
It seems like women are giving up a lot of maybe what they would want to be to appease
Yeah.
people who aren't necessarily that important to them, think they should be, right?
That is a fair way to put it, Terrain. Yeah, and they do. And again, it's nobody's fault. I mean, I speak with women obviously all the time about this, and we are just under the impression that this is how it is. Right. And so, one of the reasons why I wrote the book, The Way of the Satisfied Woman, is so that we can start questioning how it is, because this world wasn't made for us. This world wasn't made for the feminine woman. And it's told us that we're not powerful, that we're less valuable, and that our gifts are not important. And that's a lie because femininity is powerful. Femininity is fierce. Femininity has extraordinary qualities that, when brought forward, actually bring more balance to relationship, to our communities, to our careers, to our worlds. It creates connection. So we're really at a loss when we diminish the feminine. And, we see that a lot in this culture with this strong narrative and valuing of doing everything ourselves, that kind of DIY mentality where it's better if you've pulled up your own bootstraps, gotten it all done yourself, forged your own path, success at all costs, success even to the detriment of others. I definitely believed in it. I spent almost 20 years pursuing a career on my own. Katie bar the doors. I'll do it myself. Let me prove to myself and everybody else that I can do it. And we've fallen prey to this narrative that women not only should do it all for themselves and everyone else at all times, but they should never stop doing it all. Because as soon as we stop that externalization of energy, that doing everything for everyone else, the threat is that we're no longer of value and that we will be discarded. So it's kept feminine women really exhausted, burnt out, on their back foot, and in a place of disempowerment. And I challenge that because I think as soon as we stop doing everything for everyone else and we start really receiving some energy from those around us, it actually creates a place of power and empowerment for the woman.
How much of that do you think is from a woman's trauma from her past then?
It's a great question. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but I think that for women, growing up in this culture is a trauma outside of whatever else we may experience. You know, um, and that's not even compounded with whatever happened in our family growing up, the childhood traumas that were micro traumas or macro traumas or, focus traumas or whatever else we're dealing with. Just the fact that we're born a woman in this culture, we're automatically going to have more challenges and more difficulty really being heard, being seen, being honored. And so I think that we are coming definitely from kind of, the backfield here, trying to catch up to the race that's already in progress.
And I think that you're 100% true because I asked that question because as I shared earlier, right, I work with women who have been abused, either physically, financially, verbally, emotionally, or mentally, even spiritually in some cases. And what been able to identify with the women that I work with and what I've read in the research is that many women, when they've gone through a traumatic experience, either from their childhood or maybe in their teenage years or adulthood, they feel that they have to protect themselves. As you mentioned, right? The feminine energy is receiving, the masculine
Yes.
energy is giving.
Yeah.
So they're at a point where I tried to receive feminine energy, but someone always took advantage of me. So
Yes.
now I'm my guard up. I have to protect myself, right? So the energy I give out is now I'm in my masculine. So
That's right.
I'm the one that's protecting myself. I'm the one that's doing X, Y, and Z. I'm doing the DIY. I can build my own bed. I can build the renovations in the house, right? There's someone who she was so in her quote unquote masculine energy that even when she went grocery shopping, she would she would instead of asking for help and receiving help, she would rather struggle because she's so used to doing it on her own, right? Do you see that in the people we're working with where they're so used to being on the defensive that
Yes.
even if you were to offer them help, it's a sign of attack. You're
Absolutely.
thinking I can't do it, right?
Yeah. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. I actually write about it in the book. I call it donning the mask of the masculine. And it's a protective mechanism that women look, they need it. Unfortunately, like I said, this world was not built for us. And so not only have we been taught that masculine values are more prized and that's the way to achieve success, but it is a protection mechanism because the feminine is often hurt. It's often taken advantage of. It's often drained, ravaged, as opposed to ravished, which is a whole different thing that the feminine loves. But when it's ravaged, when it's taken advantage of, when it's drained of all of its resources, the feminine, it's like a well, it dries up. If the feminine doesn't have that replenishment, it becomes just this empty husk. And that's what happens to women. We become burnt out, we become exhausted, we become tired, we're more prone to things like autoimmune disorders, which are, I mean, the research is showing that they're inflammation and stress based. So we're at a complete disadvantage, and the only way we know how to get through that is to armor up, to man up for the world, to brace ourselves with this energy. And what happens is it actually, again, unfortunately, does everyone a disservice because as we man up, as we armor up, as we protect ourselves, we deny a healthy masculine counterpart the opportunity to offer his protection. As we man up and masculine up and armor ourselves for the world, we show the world that we are so capable of being in our masculine that the world responds by being in its feminine. And then we end up having to take care of everybody else. I can't tell you how many women I speak to, especially women in their 40s. There's growing numbers of statistics. Women in their 40s and 50s are initiating divorce because they suddenly realize that not only are they raising their children, they're raising their husbands too. Because there's so much in their masculine, their husbands have defaulted to the feminine. You know, anytime someone is in the presence of the masculine is powerful and everyone else will abdicate their authority to that, especially, I mean, and so we end up exhausted. We end up exhausted. And there is, you know, even more kind of micro traumas in that because we see our usefulness only as being, doing, and efforting our way through life for the benefit of everyone else. And we're the ones who get left behind.
And that leads to like the joke online where a lot of women who are in their masculine, more so than feminine, when they have children, if they have sons, they're raising the sons in a way to always be in their feminine. So they're raising the kind of men that they wouldn't want to be with anyways. But
Yes.
because they're in their masculine energy, they're
Yes.
protective. They're giving, right?
Exactly.
And
Oh my
then you put these
gosh.
boys in their feminine energy, they're receiving it, not knowing any better because it's all that they've known, right? So now when they get into the
That's
world, what happens? The cycle
exactly
continues.
right.
So what happens in that case then? Like, how do we try to correct the course if we
Yeah.
can?
I'm laughing because I actually had this discussion with another podcaster. I think it was 2 weeks ago or so. And her podcast primarily focuses on single moms. And so I said something like, okay, you know, if your kids are 12, like, please stop doing their laundry. And she just had this meltdown look on her face. And she was like, well, then the laundry won't get done. And I was like, I know. And that's going to be really hard for everybody for a while. But ultimately, that boy of yours is going to grow up and be a husband. And do you want him counting on the wife to do the laundry all the time? Because that's what's exhausted you. We cannot perpetuate these tropes. And look, this is not an easy answer. You're right. We have to give everyone grace about around this because we're in a difficult situation. We've gotten ourselves here. It's going to be some time to get ourselves out. But what I essentially postulate and write about in the book is based on it's really based on psychology. So my PhD is in mythology and psychology and the way that humans develop and the way that we interact in the world. And like it or not, all children up until the age of about 10 years old are in their feminine. They are. They're receptive, they're inquisitive, they're asking all the questions, they need all the energy drawn toward them, they're little creative beings of energy. And so the agreement that you have as an adult raising children under the age of 10 is that everybody's going to shift into their masculine to protect, provide for those kids, to guide them, to be leaders for those children. But at the age of 10 or thereabouts, there are now the hormones of pre-puberty flooding their body. Their brain is developing differently. They're starting to switch into their own individualism. And that is when they actually shift into their own polarities. And so, at that stage, psychologically, developmentally, what they then need to see in their environment is an example of their adult humans in relationship who are taking care of them in opposite polarity. And if they don't see the relationship of the humans and their environment taking care of them in opposite polarity, they just stay in their feminine and they carry on. So, we do need to start to give especially our young men, opportunities to get into their masculine. And I don't know if you've trained, I really admire and respect the work of Michael Meade. Have you ever heard of Michael Meade? Yeah, he's a phenomenal, he's a mythologist. He comes from the same background that I do, and he works with young men because young women have an interesting biology in that their biology facilitates their psychological shift into womanhood. At the time that we get our periods, we have to grapple with the fact that we can now be responsible for creating another human life. And so for, whether that's an advantage or a disadvantage, that's reality. And that usually kicks the young woman into that adult woman psychology. Unfortunately, young men don't have that same biological kick. So unless they have a social, familial, or communal kick into adulthood, they stay young boys. And that creates an incredibly detrimental psychological environment for the eventual adult who, is unable to really own his masculinity and manhood and take responsibility for his environment, his family. They kind of fall apart. And unfortunately, when they marry a woman, they're essentially going to want to be mothered in that environment. And, it's kind of an evil cycle that at any time we are capable of arresting and doing differently.
Sometimes I look at those situations as you described it, and it is on the outside. I'm going to be a little cynical here. It
Yeah,
is on the outside very sad and very unfortunate
yeah,
for the men and the women involved who grow up in these situations and who become this way, right? But
yeah.
then when you look at it from a perspective of how it impacts the individual now, you could be a little bit more less skeptical of it, more cynical of it, because you're like, well, they're impacting me in this way that really they're adults and they should be able to work through it. Right.
Well,
But I
yeah,
think some people struggle to work through it and struggle to understand how deep rooted it gets.
yeah.
Right. How deep rooted is it in the man and in the women when it comes to these types of upbringings and these behaviors?
I mean, this is the work of our lifetime, Terrain. This is why we're doing the work. Every psychology will tell you that you are wounded in relationship as a young person, and then you are meant to be healed in relationship, really an intimate relationship as an adult. And whatever you go through as a young person, you are destined to play out as an adult until you resolve that problem. I mean, that's just kind of the way of psychology. And I hear what you're saying. And really, I have compassion for both sides because on one hand, yeah, look, you're a product of your upbringing, and I'm sure, I hope that the people who helped you raise you, they were doing their best. And everybody's grown up in this environment, and everybody's received improper training. We don't really know how to navigate these energies and these polarities and these psychologies, and we're all just figuring it out. And we're in a very new stage in our cultural development where women do have agency. We're at a new stage where women can get divorced. I mean, up until the 40s or 50s, women who wanted to divorce their husbands were deemed insane and sent to mental institutions to have things like electroshock therapy because the choice to be on their own was so outrageous that it could be nothing but crazy. So these are all relatively new problems which require new solutions. And yes, every individual can find the resources necessary to help resolve the problems if they want to. And that's the good news about today, that people like you, people like me, the people that you and I work with, we're all here to support a healthier transformation, not only for the adults who have found themselves in this conundrum, but hopefully for the children who come after us so that we can support future generations from going through these same challenges.
Do you think then some people, because they've been in this type of masculine or feminine energy to their detriment instead of to their benefit, that they will continue to stay in it because they found a way for it to benefit them?
Well, I guess I would throw the question back and ask, is it really benefiting them? Like, who is it really benefiting? You know, I hear all the time from people like, oh, it's just easier to stay the same, right? And yeah, I guess so. If you're used to doing a thing a certain way, I guess that's quote easier. But ultimately, stepping into your power, stepping into your best self, yeah, it's going to be different. It might require some work. You might have to let go of control. But ultimately, that's where the ease is. Because if you're creating misery around you, if your relationship is stagnant, if you're putting all of the effort and energy in places that it's not giving a return, like none of that is easy. So I guess I would just wonder, like, what exactly is easy about it? Just because